Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument, hosted by the militant, Marxist, anti-Santa, Martin Bradbury. The Bradbury Group is streamed live on Rover, Sky TV, YouTube and Facebook. Proudly sponsored by Watea, journalism you can trust. Let the arguments begin.
Kia ora Aotearoa. The true demarcation of power in a late-stage capitalism, liberal progressive democracy is the 1% richest, plus their 9% enablers, versus the 90% rest of us. Welcome to the Bradbury Group Election 26, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. I'm your host, the editor of the daily blog, Martin Bradbury. Bomber to my comrades, Mr. Bradbury if you're nasty. My pronouns are us and we. Coming up on this evening's show, the political panel all-stars tonight are NZME business editor Fran O'Sullivan, BusinessDesk journalist Maria Slade, and New Zealand Herald columnist, academic and political commentator Matthew Hooton. Tonight's 1-on-1 in 10 is the Iran war interview with former Auckland Mayor, former UK High Commissioner and former Labour leader Phil Goff. Shout out to Kiwi Skirt and Chewy from BHN moderating tonight's YouTube page. Good evening to all the Bradbury Easters online watching right now. Your comments will appear on screen as we go. Shout out to our Watea Facebook, Rover, Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Sky TV. Whānau, remember to like and subscribe because that's all that is holding the fourth estate together right now. And our Twitter panel this evening is Tim Selwyn. He'll be tweeting live online at Twitter, hashtag the Bradbury Group. Before all that, however, is this week's War on News. Brothers and sisters, it's week 2 of Donald's illegal war on Iran, and President Trump this morning had an amazing explanation of how a Tomahawk missile striking an Iraqi girls' school, killing 170 on the first day of the attack, wasn't America's fault because, you're going to love this, anyone could buy a Tomahawk missile and use it. Let's just get this straight. The footage showing a US Tomahawk missile striking the school on the first day of the attack doesn't prove that it was America, because anyone can buy a Tomahawk missile and frame America. Firstly, not everyone can buy Tomahawk missiles. They are used exclusively by America. Secondly, is he really suggesting a third party was holding on to an American Tomahawk missile and used it at the very same time as America attacked so as to frame America for a war crime? What's more likely? That someone is framing Trump, or American smart bombs are actually pretty stupid when 170 schoolgirls have been blown to bits by your missiles? Pretending someone took your missile and misused it seems a tad churlish. Talking of the illegal war in Iran, the only person who seemed surprised that Iran closed the Straits of Hormuz was Donald Trump, which in of itself seems confusing because every single time the CIA goons and military geeks war game an attack on Iran, it has Iran closing the straits as its opening move. Every single time. So the predictable spike in oil prices should surprise no one, least of all Donald Trump, because this is his war. And he should have known Iran would immediately do this. That he didn't feels like he's making this up as it goes along, which manages to make a horrific situation even more terrifying. And finally, this week, talking of making a horrific situation more terrifying, comes this comment from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who justified attacking Iran by saying the following, and I quote, "Let me explain to you guys. Iran is run by lunatics, religious, fanatic lunatics." That image in the corner there is President Trump surrounded by evangelical Christians praying for him, and American troops have been told this conflict is the Armageddon promised in the book of Revelation. So, who is run by religious fanatic lunatics again? If you are a Christian who doesn't like that joke, turn the other cheek. The political panel all stars up shortly, whānau, but first, this week's 1-on-1 in 10 Iran war interview with Phil Goff. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show, and thank you for being available to the Fourth Estate. Your democracy is grateful, and your wisdom, Phil, on America's war against Iran is sorely needed.
Yeah, thanks, Bomber. It's a pretty grim situation that we've got into, and we're 10 days into the war now. What's incredibly clear from it is that this was a war that the United States entered into without a plan, without any clear objectives, and on premises that were totally false. I guess it takes me back to the time when I was foreign minister and we had the invasion of Iraq under President Bush. And the claim at that stage was that the war met the requirements of the UN Charter and international law because there were weapons of mass destruction. Now, our intelligence people were telling me as minister they had no evidence of weapons of mass destruction still being in Iraq. Hans Blix, who was in charge of an organisation called UNMIVIC,
that's right,
doing the weapons inspections, said to me, Phil, we haven't been able to find any evidence. And lo and behold, what happened? When the invasion happened and they occupied and searched high and low in Iraq, they found no weapons of mass destruction. In this particular occasion, we've had a variety of reasons given by President Trump. One was that he said that, look, they were about to strike us. Well, look, you don't have to be very smart to understand that countries don't attack great powers that have 50 times more military might than they have. It's a little bit like Putin saying, actually, it was Ukraine that started this war. Clearly, there was no intelligence that they were about to strike. The military intelligence from the United States denied that they had any understanding that that was about to happen. Second reason given was this was about regime change. Yeah, so was Iraq, so was Libya. Afghanistan's slightly different because there were justifications for going into Afghanistan. But what we know is that when you try to achieve regime change from outside, you often end up with a regime worse than you had before.
Right.
I was reading General David Petraeus the other day, and he said, without the invasion of Iraq, there would be no ISIS. So when they went into Iraq on false pretenses, they created chaos. They had no plan. They caused a massive increase in terrorism around the world, and literally tens of thousands of people died. So, this is a very strange situation where it looks like President Trump has been led by the nose by Netanyahu. Netanyahu has said, look, we know that the Ayatollah is meeting with some key people at his compound on this date. We need to strike now. We need to strike while Iran is weak. This is a war led by Israel, followed by the United States, that has no justification. Yes, it's a terrible regime, but are we going to get anything better at the end of it? We've got the Ayatollah's son, who is more hardline, more pro-nuclear weapon, and more corrupt.
Phil,
so far, the opposite results.
Phil, for almost 40 years, Netanyahu has been claiming Iran is mere moments away from building a nuclear bomb requiring the West to attack Iran. He claimed this in a Knesset speech in 1992. He claimed it in a book in 1995. He claimed it in a US Congress speech in 1996. He claimed it in a congressional delegation in 2009. He claimed it at the UN General Assembly in 2012. He claimed it in a 2015 speech to the US Congress. He claimed it again in another 2018 speech. It again last year during media interviews. No American administration over those 40 years were stupid enough to get conned into a war with Iran, because every single time their CIA geeks and military goons war game out a fight, it always ends in a bloodbath massacre with regional wars, an Iranian civil war, a couple of American capital ships sunk, global energy prices exploding, and a refugee crisis that swamps Turkey. The question I want to ask you is the following. Was the greatest danger from Trump illegally kidnapping the Venezuelan president and annexing their oil the self-belief that he could get away with ignoring the rules-based order?
Yeah, well, look, let's face it. Trump has absolutely trashed the rules-based order. We had a problem before. We've had a problem ever since 1945 because the great powers gave themselves the veto,
right?
So that you can get 90% of the General Assembly saying this is what we should do, and one country, and it's usually either been Russia or the United States, will veto it.
Yeah.
So it was an imperfect system, but at least it was a system that you could hold up a country's actions against the Charter, against international law, and bring pressure to bear on them. Trump has trashed the system set up by Franklin Delano Roosevelt
Yes.
and his successor as president. It was a system that worked better than we'd had before.
Yep.
It was still imperfect, but if you don't have the rule of law, you have might is right and countries that have the power doing whatever they like. And clearly, Trump believes, he's actually admitted it himself. He said the only thing that holds me back from doing anything is my sense of moral standards. Well, sorry, we know what a sense of moral standards are in more ways than one. That's not something good to rely on.
Has Trump horribly miscalculated that Iranian religious zealots could be as bullied and bribed as a corrupt revolutionary government? I mean, by assassinating the Ayatollah, America and Israel have already breached Iran's red lines, haven't they?
Yeah, look, I don't think the Iranian Revolutionary Guard are going to step back. They're not going to surrender. They're not going to surrender unconditionally. These people are bad. They're bad. I make no bones at all about that. But you do not get regime change from airstrikes from the sky. Now, let's just remember what the history of this country is. The first coup against a democratically elected prime minister in 1953 was orchestrated by the British in conjunction with the CIA. They overthrew a democratic government, replaced it with the Tsar. And don't forget, for all of the Iranian protesters that are saying, quite rightly, that this regime is terrible, think back to the Tsar's days. He was a man that was authoritarian. He was a man that locked up and took out of action anyone that dissented from his regime, and they're wanting to put back the same sort of system. Now, look, I hope there is regime change, but it's not going to come in the way that the Americans have tried to organise it. They're organising the Kurds and the Azeris to ethnic minorities within Iran. But what we know, as we found out in Iraq and we found out in Libya, that creates chaos.
Right.
And where you've got chaos, you've got the basis to spread terrorism, criminal activities, people and drug trafficking, you name it. So if you want regime change, there are different ways of going about it. This is not the way to go about it. This will not achieve the objectives that Trump has claimed for it. And now you've got, of course, Rubio saying, oh, it's not about regime change at all. So, look, we keep getting conflicting accounts from the United States. But what we know is that we've got a serious situation that is a war of choice, not a war of necessity, that has not got clear objectives and is likely to leave the world a worse place rather than a better place. One more point on this, Bomber. Yes, look, they are enriching uranium in Iran. And right from the beginning, we've said that uranium should not be enriched to the level that could create a nuclear bomb.
Yes.
There's no evidence that they've tried to create a nuclear bomb yet, but they've enriched uranium to a level that would make that possible. There was an agreement reached, largely led by the Europeans, in 2018. Trump came in and he trashed it, left a vacuum. And the Iranians went back to doing what they were without supervision. There were talks going on, supervised by the foreign minister of Oman.
That's right.
He said they were making real progress.
That's right.
Big concessions had been made by Iran. You could have had verification and monitoring to ensure that they couldn't have done that. In the middle of those talks, which can only be seen as bad faith, the attack was launched.
Right.
That took out the leader of Iran and started this war. So, and of course, Donald Trump was telling us in the State of the Union address 3 days before he attacked Iran that he had obliterated the nuclear facilities in Iran. So either he was lying then, or he's lying now, saying that they had to go in because they were making another weapon. None of it adds up. It's all based on falsehoods. It's bad for the world. People are dying. Buildings and infrastructure and etc. are being destroyed. And look, we know that girls' school was taken out by a missile fired by the Americans.
Right.
I heard Trump. I was listening to him. He said, I think the Iranians did it.
Yes.
Hegseth, who is not a man that I have any respect for, was behind the president saying, we're still investigating this.
Come on.
Truth may be the first casualty in a war, but truth was lost long before this war started when it comes to the Trump administration. You cannot believe a word that Trump says. Every speech is riddled with falsehoods.
Right.
And that is a tragedy for a country that should be the leader of the free and democratic world.
Preach. Killing the Ayatollah would be as big an impact on believers as assassinating the Pope. Hasn't Trump and Netanyahu set in motion a terrible terrorism blowback here?
Well, he creates the risk that people that are against the Iranian regime will come in behind the regime because of the devastation being done to their country by outsiders. So it could well be counterproductive. I mean, I believe that 80% of Iranian people, I've been to Iran a couple of times, don't want the theocratic regime, don't want the dogma and the ideology that the regime is imposing on them. But you will not get the change that we would all like to see in the manner in which Israel and the United States has gone about it. We may well get the reverse.
How can we criticize Russia for their illegal war on the Ukraine yet stay silent when America and Israel launch an illegal war on Iran?
Well, that's absolutely right. You can't say I believe in the rule of law when it's the Russians that are breaking the rule of law and the United Nations Charter, but it's okay if the Americans do it.
Right.
And the irony of this situation, Bomber, is that this war will be helping Russia more than anyone else.
Right.
Why?
Right.
Because already Trump has lifted the sanctions against India purchasing oil from Russia. And now he's talking about lifting the sanctions altogether.
Yeah.
The Russians will keep the war in Ukraine going on the basis of the money they'll make out of their oil sales at the hugely inflated price that oil is currently selling for. Again, totally counterproductive if you want a decent world and a world that stops the sort of aggression that we've seen from Russia against the Ukrainians. And if we say that the Iranian leadership is corrupt and evil and awful, what do we say about this man, Putin, that murders his opponents, Navalny, and is responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people in a war that isn't justified?
Yeah.
So, this Putin goes to the United States, to Alaska, gets welcomed on the red carpet and a double handshake from the president, a totally different standard that he's holding Putin to than what he's holding the Iranian regime to.
Finally, Phil,
please be consistent.
Finally, Phil, you were sacked as UK High Commissioner by the Foreign Minister, Winston Peters, for daring to be critical of Trump. What do you think of this government's appalling acquiescence to America, and how should New Zealand be using its global platform?
Yeah, well, I guess what I feel is that history will be on my side on this one.
Yeah,
what I said about Trump, the question I raised about Trump, does he understand history? Clearly he doesn't, or he doesn't care about it.
Yeah.
If he understood history, then he would not be appeasing Putin over Ukraine. If he understood history, he would not be trying to get regime change in the manner that he's trying to do. He doesn't, not only does he not understand history, he doesn't care. He cares about one thing, his own power and his own enrichment. And after that, whether this might be good. If Iran didn't have oil, would there be a war? If Venezuela didn't have oil, would there have been the removal of Maduro as the president? And everybody knows the answer to those questions.
What do you think we should be doing with our voice right now, Phil?
Well, I think we should be doing what traditionally I believe New Zealand should always do. We have to speak up for our interests and we have to speak up for our values. Now, if I was foreign minister, I wouldn't be quite using the terms that I'm using on your show tonight and I'm using in public, but I'm not foreign minister.
That's right.
I'm citizen Goff and I can say what I bloody like and I can say that regardless of who I might offend and what I'm saying. I will keep saying it as long as I believe that it's the truth. But we could, yes, you've got to behave differently when you're foreign minister, but you should not put up with what Trump is doing because silence is complicity. And the thing that really made me angry about Peters was that when President Trump suggested that other countries that were in Afghanistan, which includes New Zealand, were too cowardly to be on the front line. I went to the funerals of the New Zealand service people that died in that country. I know the hurt and the insult that was to those families of those people that died for their country and for us in Afghanistan. Even Starmer spoke out and said, that's wrong and that's insulting. We didn't have a word from Winston Peters, not a word of criticism. Now, I would have thought that when something is as egregiously wrong as that and as insulting as that, you would at least stand up for your dead service people and say that is not true. They died on the front line. They died in a fight against terrorism. They died for their country, and we will not tolerate that sort of insult against their memory. That's what I would have expected, and that's what I would have done as Foreign Minister, without a word of apology for it.
Always a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you, comrade. We'll see you again very shortly.
Thanks, Bomber.
Cheers, bro. Okay, now to our political panel all-stars. Our first panellist is the union rep for Slytherin House. He makes Machiavelli look like a virgin, and he's the only New Zealand right-winger not on the taxpayers' union payroll. Perpetually joining us from a secure, undisclosed location for reasons we can't disclose. New Zealand Herald columnist Matthew Hooton. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show. One word to describe the week, please, sir.
Fantastical. The reason it's fantastical is the first bit of it is that we had the Prime Minister talking about his polling. And we learned from him on Friday that he receives the polling from David Farrar,
Yes.
who was John Key and Bill English's pollster, seen as perhaps the best political pollster in New Zealand.
Yes.
Anyway, and we know that it was pretty negative for National, but according to the Prime Minister, what he does, he gets the raw data and he sends it over to a couple of people in Melbourne, he said London, but he was wrong, who used to work for Simon Bridges and Paula Bennett, and they changed the numbers and send them back to him, and apparently those numbers are better than the ones that Farrar takes. So that was the first one, and
Yes.
then the second fantastical thing was the Minister of Finance at the press conference yesterday.
Yes.
She announced she started to pay back Labor's debt. She hasn't paid back any debt. I don't know what on earth she was talking about.
We'll get into that with you.
She has added to the debt.
We'll get into that with you a little bit
We're in a
later.
fantasy world this week. We're in a fantasy world.
Our next panellist is the doyen of the political right, and alongside Matthew Hooton is the only other reason you would buy a New Zealand Herald subscription. NZME, head of business, the unstoppable force of nature that is Fran O'Sullivan. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show.
Kia ora.
One word to describe the week, please.
Sane, finally.
Yes.
Yes. Last week was a wash, but I think this week they came into the press conference yesterday with more of a game plan.
Yes.
Admittedly, they didn't really stake it out as much as I would have liked from the point of view of, what are we seeing economically?
Yes.
I mean, to be honest, I don't give a flying F about the Prime Minister's personal poll ratings.
Yes.
This is a repetitive story week after week after week. There are polls ad infinitum now. I think it gets in the way of journalists actually doing some real investigation into what is actually happening internationally and how it might affect us. And to me, finally, that they came in, he still wobbled off, halfway through the press conference, but at least they came in with some sort of sense that they were grasping the magnitude of what we face. So sanity.
And last but certainly not least, our final panellist is quite frankly too good for this show. One of the best and most respected business journalists in New Zealand, property editor at BusinessDesk, Maria Slade. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show.
Kia ora.
One word to describe the week, please, ma'am.
Tricky.
Tricky.
Tricky like the Middle East.
Tricky like the Middle
A
East.
couple of years ago, some girlfriends and I were sitting around drinking way too much Chardonnay and talking about the Middle East. I have no idea why. And one of my friends very sagely said, yes, it's tricky. And so tricky like the Middle East is now our catchphrase, but I think it's got a whole lot more trickier.
Brothers and sisters, let's get into tonight's show. Issue 1, political fallout of the war. Can Luxon hold on? Issue 2, economic fallout of the war. Can the economy hold on? And issue 3, what are the polls telling us about election 2026? Plus, we'll have a final word at the end of the show where each panelist gets to go to the mountaintop to see who breaches broadcasting standards this week. My money is on Maria. Let's kick things off with issue 1, and that is the political fallout of the war. Can Luxon hold on? Matthew, they often say that truth is the first casualty of war, but with the Iranian war, the first casualty may be the Prime Minister's job. For most of his train wreck press conference last week, the Prime Minister of New Zealand was justifying carpet bombing Tehran. He said afterwards that he misspoke, but carpet bombing civilian targets seems like one of those issues that are pretty clear cut. Did he misspeak, or did he miscomprehend? Because the former is forgivable, the latter is not.
Well, last Monday was a complete fiasco, and we talked about it on the show last week. And I would agree with Fran that this week is more sane than last week. That is true. There probably is slightly more sanity this week. And as Fran said, the Prime Minister and his Finance Minister did arrive at the conference with something substantial to say. But I think he really didn't understand the nature of the position that he was putting forward, and that Winston Peters put forward, working in consultation with the Department of Prime Minister and the Foreign Ministry. So he miscomprehended, I think, which led to him misspeaking.
Follow-up question. Judith Collins was the deciding faction that enabled Luxon to become PM when Simon Bridges challenged her. She is stepping down in June. Could the coup against Luxon occur once she has stepped down and her faction open coalescing with other factions?
No, I don't think that's an important element to whether or not the Prime Minister survives as leader of the National Party. Events are interesting, aren't they? I wonder what would have happened if the Black Caps hadn't made the T20 World Cup final and Chris Bishop hadn't gone to India to watch the final. We might have a different Prime Minister. I think, if the polls continue to be this terrible for Nationals, so that a quarter of their MPs would lose their jobs and there would be, at best, a re-elected coalition with a one-seat majority, but with National extremely weak in it, then the numbers, then all the speculation will continue. But what it is saving him is really Nicola Willis, because amongst the senior front benches, they just can't agree who should be the Prime Minister if there were to be a vacancy. Yeah. And that's what's holding us back. And I think Nicola Willis is deputy, she's Minister of Finance, and I think she's worked out that if she becomes Prime Minister, from her perspective, that'd be terrific. But not everybody thinks she should be the successor, because some of the problems the government had are related to her performance in the finance portfolio. But if someone else becomes Prime Minister, then she won't get to continue as Finance Minister. So for her, it's it's either Luxon stays or she becomes Prime Minister. She's not really interested in other options.
Fran, this government has been very keen to acquiesce to American power and not anger Trump in our foreign affairs statements. Is that strategy worthy of us, or is the reality this is the price of doing business?
Yeah, it's pragmatic in my view. And, if you just look at what's happened from various political leaders who have had a slash at Trump, hasn't gone well for them. They've been
gets vindictive, eh?
Yes, he does. And places get hit with massive tariffs, that type of thing.
Yeah.
But, put that to one side. I think what there is, though, is strong commonality between our foreign affairs, if you like, the deep state, the State Department and others in the US. We have been part of a growing alliance in all but name over several years now.
Yes.
And irrespective of Trump, that will continue. And it does continue. I mean, just recently, critical minerals regime, we were starting to get involved with that.
That's right.
I think we just kind of look through these outrages and it's just where we are. But it's very interesting. If you look what happened in Australia and also in Canada in particularly, where Carney had been head-to-head with Trump.
That's right.
Both those players pretty much ordained the move that Trump had taken in Iran.
Yes, so they did.
These are shifting coalitions of interest around the place, and we've just got to do fancy footwork.
Follow-up question. You have deep contacts inside the National Party. Are they worried by Luxon's performance? I mean, quietly, when they're sort of commenting with you, rolling their eyes, going, oh, my God, this is terrible. They're saying, no, he's pretty good. What's the actual vibe?
No one rolls their eyes at me.
Amen, right. Sister. Amen.
No, seriously.
Yep.
I sound like I'm a little bit sort of alone.
Trumpian.
That's right.
But anyway, look, yes, obviously people can see the play, what it is. But, they're rationalists. They put them in there. And my view, if they were going to do anything, probably last year was the time to do it. But I do take your point that some of the people who are loyalists or have been to, the Prime Minister will go off the political stage over the next little while.
Maria, even in his post-cabinet press conference on Monday, alongside Nicola Willis, the PM still managed to look overshadowed by his finance minister. Is Luxon getting better, or is he getting worse with the media, and we've got an election in November?
I don't think he's getting any better. I never understood why they didn't choose Nicola Willis in the first place, actually. She's not liked by everybody, but she always struck me.
She was pretty good on Monday, eh?
She
was
always
pretty
struck
good.
me as very competent. Did they just not want a girl? Did they not think a girl could do the job or something? I don't know.
Good point.
I always wondered why they didn't choose her. I do think, though, that 9-10 months out from an election, changing a leader is it's just bad.
Right.
It's just bad.
Right.
And I come from a bit more of the outside. You guys are a bit more in the sort of politico kind of realm than I am. I'm not in Wellington, sort of, in the corridors of power kind of
Thank
thing.
Jesus.
But I'm talking to business people in that. And business likes consistency. Business likes stability. Business does like a national government, but, hey, they kind of roll with the punches.
Right.
But, yeah, getting rid of your leader at this stage in the game, it smacks a bit of desperation. It just unsettles everybody. And
Follow-up question. Why doesn't Luxon connect as the PM when he seemed to do a pretty good job when he was the CEO of Air New Zealand? I don't remember him being this difficult and awkward when he was the CEO of Air New Zealand. He seemed pretty friendly, seemed pretty loose, someone who you could sort of relate with. But as the PM, he seems to have lost any of that.
He's pretty plain vanilla, isn't he? He doesn't sort of show much personality. I mean, if you compare him to John Key, who was very funny, very witty, very sort of folksy in the way he related to people, you can't even compare them really. But the one thing I always say is that being a CEO and being a Prime Minister are two quite different things, two very different things. When you're a CEO, you say jump, everybody says how high.
Yeah.
When you're a politician, a prime minister, you've got to corral people. You've got to bring them along with you. You've got to do backroom deals. You've got to give a bit here and take a bit there to get a few things done. It is a completely different kind of job to me.
Quick round to all of you. Will Luxon lead National at the election? Matthew?
I think there's a 52% chance that he will.
Doesn't sound very good. Fran, is he going to lead into the election?
Yep.
Maria?
If they've got any sense, yes, he will.
Comrades, we need to move on to issue 2 tonight, and that is the economic fallout of the war. Can the economy hold on? Fran, National's election plan requires the economy feeling slightly less damaged than it is, and the middle classes giving National their vote again. But the inflation spike from the war on Iran is going to swamp those green shoots of recovery. What is National's play if the economy fails?
Well, I think in some respects it's the disaster you need to have if you want to get re-elected, because you've actually got an excuse for things not actually turning out as might have been foreshadowed before. But I think the big thing is, if Trump can't get an off-ramp fairly quickly, and if it continues, and if, what's happening to the markets in the US and the calculation around his own midterms don't force him to haul back, this is going to get very, very nasty, and it's going to require really adroit leadership. It may mean, despite what has so far been said, that you might have to do some sort of subsidisation around fuels. I mean, people think it's just putting stuff into cars, but it's everything. It's your plants, it's your agribusinesses.
Right.
It's right across the place. So in some ways, it enables them to look as if they can front foot something, which they haven't before. It's just been watching stuff spiral down.
Follow-up question. You have deep connections into the business community. What are they telling you about the state of the economy? And do they place any of that at the feet of National?
Oh, look, yes, I think in some ways, if you go back and, the pretty absurd promises that National made and delivered on instead of ripping straight into the debt pile that we had. So, there's things around that. Really, did they need to promise what they promised? I mean, one of the reasons why Simon Bridges walked, because if you're a very competent, smart politician, you can see what lies ahead of you. So, look, I think people are just pragmatic.
Yes.
I think really at the moment it is sort of what is the game plan for what's unfolding now. And on that, there are worries. One of the big worries still is energy. I was at a function at lunchtime at which actually John Key was at speaking, and giving his hot takes on what was happening internationally. But it was quite interesting talking to one or two people and very deeply concerned about what's happening in manufacturing with energy costs going right up through the roof.
Right, in New Zealand manufacturing?
Yeah, New Zealand.
Right.
New Zealand, yes. So, it's been very difficult if you go back over the last couple of years. And I think that is an area where the government hasn't front-footed it by any means fast enough and aggressively enough.
Maria, liquidations are at a 15-year high. Will an inflation spike impact those numbers?
The liquidation numbers are not as clear-cut as all that, because at the moment what's driving them is the IRD.
Right,
The IRD has, they've run out of road, basically,
Yes.
and the IRD takes a very long time before they'll liquidate someone.
Yes.
So this is a hangover from almost COVID days
Yep.
in a lot of cases. So they're not really a true reflection. It's just a sort of a part of the cycle that we've got to go through, and we're currently going through it. And I sit up there at the High Court and I follow some of these, and some of these companies are ratbag companies that probably deserve to go anyway.
Sure.
So I don't know that is the best kind of indicator. But yeah, at the moment, the economy, everything just feels so flat. And I think that Fran is absolutely right about the energy. That is an absolute problem. I wrote a story about a company down on Rosebank Road called Glucina Alloys. They are New Zealand's, well, in fact, they are pretty much Australasia's only aluminium recycler.
Right.
And they are facing, it's a Hobson's choice, because their gas contract runs out very soon. And they've looked at switching to electricity, but the cost of installing it, Vector were going to charge them $500,000 just for the connection.
Whoa!
And it's just unsustainable. They can't do it. So they're currently looking around for, do they go to biofuels? What do they do?
Right.
Because if they can't find an alternative, they're going to have to close. And we wrote that story, and one of our best read stories on BusinessDesk, I can't remember for the month.
Because of energy costs. People, it's so widespread.
It really, the plight of this business really brought it home to people, the conundrum that a lot of businesses are facing. And this idea that we're going to import LPG, well, I mean, that comes with its own set of problems, and we're still at the whims of world prices and that with LPG. I'm no energy correspondent, but it just seems to me there's got to be some smarter. The politicians have got to start coming out with some smarter ideas of how we're going to deal with some of these problems.
Matthew, what are the New Zealand bond markets telling you about the state of the economy?
Well, the first one is don't trade on what Trump says. Trump made some comments about the war was going to last for a long time. So the price of oil went to $120 or something, $110, and bond yields around the world leapt up. And then the next day, Trump says, might be over soon, and oil goes back to 80, I think, and bond yields fall. So I think people who are trading in the markets, whether it's bonds or whether it's equities, or precious metals, probably should look at the fundamentals rather than what Trump says, because that just simply can't be relied upon as a safe thing to base an investment on. But look, you mentioned the bond markets, and the other third thing that was fantastical this week was last week was when the Prime Minister said that of 195 countries in the world, New Zealand is the best place to deal with this crisis. Well, it's simply not true. We have debt that is high and projected to keep going high. We've got the demographic time bomb coming up shortly. We're not energy independent like some other countries. We don't export oil, which, like Russia will benefit if the oil price goes higher. And the bond market did speak yesterday, and it is basically New Zealand bonds yields have gone up by more than almost any other country.
Why?
Now, what that indicates, what the traditional way of indicating it the traditional way of interpreting it, the first thing about the bond market is never interpret it because it knows better than you. But the traditional way of interpreting that would be to say the bond market thinks that the New Zealand's going to have an inflation problem and a depreciating currency, which are obviously related things. And that's what the bond market was essentially saying yesterday.
Follow-up question.
I don't know where the Prime Minister gets his information
Well,
from.
let's try and work out where the Finance Minister gets it. The follow-up question, the Finance Minister says New Zealand is well placed to handle any geopolitical tensions. Is she right? She has borrowed more money than Labour did. How are we in a more stable position if that's true?
Well, like I say, I don't think we are. The bond markets don't think we are. I think we are highly vulnerable. Basically, Ian Rennie, the Secretary of the Treasury, has been saying for a long time that New Zealand, when crises come along, what happens is New Zealanders borrow a whole lot of money, 10% of GDP, and then we don't pay that money back and get back into surplus between the crises. And that's what's happened, despite warnings from people like me, people like Fran, people like the business community, people like the Taxpayers Union, the New Zealand Initiative, saying the deficit had to be the number one priority for the government. That was not the view that the government took. And as a result, if we do head into a crisis, I would predict Nicola Willis will do the usual thing, is borrow 10% of GDP again, and tell us that, oh, well, it was an exception and it was just a one-off. And that's what we've been told for 20 years each time these crises come along.
Quick round. New Zealand inflation is 3.1%. What will it be in the election month of November 2026? Fran?
4%.
Oh, Jesus. Maria?
Depends on Trump. Really does.
Matthew, what's it going to be?
Well, the law and the policy remit says that it should be 2%, because that's what the midpoint target is, and it should always be 2%. But that would mean much higher interest rates. So we'll see.
Comrades, we need to move on to issue 3 tonight, and that is what are polls telling us about election 2026. Maria, Roy Morgan, the most accurate poll from the last 2 elections, has top at 4%, just under the 5% threshold. Is Labour plus Greens plus top a far less scary outcome than Labour plus Greens plus Te Pāti Māori?
It was really interesting the other day when Chris Hooton was talking about the idea of whether they could govern as a minority government, actually. That's quite an interesting concept. We haven't had that for a while,
that's right.
So I'd be fascinated to see if that ever happened. But look, on the subject of polls, it's just so interesting at the moment. I don't know if you saw that Gallup no longer tracks the US presidential approval ratings.
That's right,
so why is this? Is this threats of legal action? Because as we know, Trump's done that before. But also there's this other concept
Bye-bye.
The polls just aren't as accurate, perhaps, as they used to be. Daniel McLaughlin did a piece in The Listener just the other day about how, people don't sit at home and answer their landlines like they do. So they have to do a bit of jiggery-pokery to try and figure out where people are at. And it seems to be not as hard and fast as it used to be, a guide.
No.
So throw that into the mix, and are the current polls that accurate? That's what I would ask.
Well, I mean, we know from the New Zealand polling that National usually overpolls in these, so they could be in a much worse position.
Well, they could. Let's just assume for a moment the polls are accurate, and would we be looking at a would you say Labour Greens top coalition?
Is that less scary because at the moment the right can say Labour plus Greens plus Te Pāti Māori, too crazy, too scary, can't make that message about those 3.
Yeah, but am I right in saying that the Greens and Labour have never coalesced before, so they would have to get over that one? One of you political people could probably answer that question for me. I think I read that.
Kind of, that's right. You're right.
So, okay, so all right. So maybe we are talking a minority government with a confidence and supply agreement. That's been done before.
Yeah.
I don't think that's scary. I think that might be quite a sensible, pragmatic way through.
Yeah. Matthew, if Winston is the kingmaker for the 5th time, it's either 12 months of him as PM with National and ACT or 18 months with him as PM with Labour and the Greens. If that's the calcified choice, doesn't top become more attractive as a disruptor for blue-green voters?
Well, I think we are a probability that the 2 main parties are really going to struggle, as they are in Australia, as they are in the UK, and as they have been if you consider them the traditional Republican Party, as they have in the US for a long time.
Yes.
And so I think there's a possibility of that 2002 situation where, that was United Future, a centrist party. It came out from nowhere to get, I think, 7%. And so I think anything might happen in this election. And with the political leadership as uninspiring as it currently is in the main parties, I wouldn't rule out any type of result, and I wouldn't rule out then the coalition negotiations becoming incredibly dynamic.
Right.
And anything is possible. But certainly the Labour Party does not want to govern with the Greens and Te Pāti Māori. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And that fear campaign by National, I think the polls just aren't supporting it as well as National would hope.
Fran, if we acknowledge that National overpolled by 2 points in most of the mainstream New Zealand polls, National could be in a worse position than being recognised. What do they need to do to win support back? It's the National Party. They should be mid-30s any given day of the week.
Yeah, they should be, but they're not, are they? So I think, it's just got to cut out a lot of political noise. I think they've got to be more definitive with their, wing parties. I think there's just too much deference at the top. I think the occasional swipe from the Prime Minister would go down quite well, even if Mr Peters wouldn't like it.
You know John Key way better than any of us here. I put to you, he would never have put up with the kind of stuff that Seymour or Winston has been trying in the last 2 years. He would have gone, nah, we're not doing that.
Well, he wouldn't have done a deal like that, giving quite so much power to both sides. But also he's far more adroit when it comes to, horizontal management, if you like to use a corporate kind of term. Yeah, but and he reads people very well. He's interesting. I mean, today, really, he was just talking about also, he's of the view that the Iran thing won't be a long-run thing at all. He talked a little bit about, just sort of the political situation. He's obviously someone that, PM appeals to, for a sounding board. But he's also a sounding board, I would say, for several other, high-profile people as well at National. Obviously, Nicola, who was a previous, mentored by him. Chris Bishop, been in the political realm. I think also Erica Stanford. People are looking at, if you like, the bloodlines of these potential political people who might come through either this term or next term. So I think there's a lot of who's judging the horses now and thinking it through. And, that's a sensible calculation to be making, which is not to say anyone's going to get tipped now. But I would say if it's a, close-run thing and they do manage to climb back into power, it may well be that, the current Prime Minister would be standing down in the next term.
Right.
Yeah.
Quick round to all of you. What happens if Top gets over 5% this election? Maria Slade.
Well, we never thought Te Pāti Māori would have the power that it did in the until they imploded. Obviously. Yep. So it would just be another interesting quirk that the Parliament would have to deal with, I suppose.
Right. Matthew, what happens if Top gets over 5%?
It would hold the balance of power and it would get to decide who the Prime Minister was.
Fran?
I don't know enough about them.
Comrades, we need to wrap the show with a final word. Maria, your final word this week, please, ma'am.
A story that's been consuming me this week has been the collapse of Teak Construction. Large construction company here in Auckland. They put themselves into liquidation, so shareholder-appointed liquidator. Now there's an absolute dogfight going on amongst very, very angry subbies about whether the liquidator should be replaced. They're saying he's not independent, of course, because he was appointed by the shareholders. So stand by for that little shindig next week. But the thing that it makes me think about is the Construction Contracts Act, and is it actually serving our industry very well? And I would say it is not.
Why?
Because they did move 3 years ago to create better protections around retentions. That doesn't seem to make any difference. These companies, they're supposed to keep the retentions in trust, but do they? Is it policed?
Really?
What happens as one lawyer who's working with a group of subcontractors said to me, you have this problem with a lot of Asian contractors who don't speak English very well, that they are pretty prevalent in the sector. They seem to get ripped off left, right, and centre, and who's protecting them.
Right.
As one subby did say to me, the CCA, the Contract Act, what is it doing for us? It appears to be doing nothing.
Wow.
Construction companies can just close up and walk away, which seems to be what's happening in this case. So that's my little soapbox moment for them. For this is the sort of thing that politicians don't think about. But this kind of law at the coalface,
it's supposed to protect those workers,
and you're talking about productivity, and yet you've got thousands going west because some rogue construction company just decides it suits them to liquidate and move on. So there you are.
Fran, your final word this week, please, ma'am.
Oh, just really kind of a plea for excitement and calm at the same time. I do think the international situation requires everybody to drop the rhetoric. I mean, yes, I've heard Phil Goff ad infinitum on full bore, but however, I really want to know a little bit more about how do we navigate through where we are. And I really am hoping that at the top levels of government, foreign affairs, Treasury, Reserve Bank, everybody is actually lining their ducks up. Whether we need to use them, we don't know yet, but however, we don't have to go to a full collapse or anything.
Matthew, your final word this week, please, sir.
Well, with everyone focusing on Iran, they might have missed that Pakistan has decided to have a crack at Afghanistan.
Yes, that's right.
And, I just would counsel the government of Pakistan against this. Afghanistan, you don't fuck with Afghanistan.
Exactly.
That is the rule of for more
How
than
many
1,000
empires
years.
end up dead?
The United States and NATO couldn't conquer it. The Soviet Union, the British
could the
Empire
Russians.
lost all its soldiers when it invaded it in the 1800s. Genghis Khan, however, he got there and he took over Bayan, where that air base was. That
As
New
the
Zealand
ambassador for
Mongolia,
Mongolia,
right.
that's right.
He got that far. Now what? But Genghis Khan was smart. Genghis Khan looked at the geography of Afghanistan and he thought, no, my goal is to take over the world. I'm not going to die in a quagmire here. So he left Afghanistan, most of it alone. And the Pakistanis should listen.
Thank you, comrades. And now to my final word. Brothers and sisters, today the Supreme Court of New Zealand reopened the Scott Watson murder case and will consider submissions regarding the reliability of witness Guy Wallace, who identified Watson as having been with the young couple on a water taxi the last time they were seen alive. The 1998 murder of Ben Smart and Olivia Hope in the Melbourne Sounds is one of New Zealand's most notorious double homicides and one of our most questionable convictions. There have always been enormous question marks over this case, and it is right for the Supreme Court to review it because this could be a cruel miscarriage of justice. For me, it never sat right that boat people saw a double-masted ketch and not the single-masted boat Watson had. The convenient finding of hairs belonging to Olivia used to frame Scott Watson, the use of prison narcs to frame Watson, and most disturbingly, the fact that police officers involved in the Scott Watson case later went on to develop interview programs for the New Zealand police that were found to be incredibly unsafe and produced false confessions. There's a war on, the economy is melting down, and we have runaway climate change to worry about. But if Scott Watson is not guilty, we have kept an innocent man in jail for 27 years for 2 murders he didn't commit. We need to give a damn about that. In solidarity, the revolution continues. Ka pai Aotearoa.
The Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. The Bradbury Group is an independent podcast through the Rover Network, sponsored by Wātea News. Everything on the show is an opinion and shouldn't be taken seriously enough to attempt defamation action against us. We were joking. We're never serious about anything. And officially, a small weta in Avondale is legally the owner. Good luck finding him. Don't forget to follow, like and comment.